This podcast series is part of the mission of the New York Intellectual Property Law Association, NYIPLA, Past Presidents Committee, to preserve a snippet of the history of our association through the eyes of our past presidents, and to provide continuity for our century-old association's values and traditions for future NYIPLA leaders. I'm Rob Rando, the current president of NYIPLA for the 2023-2024 term. Today, we are pleased to have with us Melvin Garner. He was the 81st president of the NYIPLA during the 2003-2004 term. Mel, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get started with any questions, is there anything you want to say as we begin?
I think this is a wonderful project, and I'm glad you're doing it, and something that when you get interviewed 20 years from now, you can remember as one of the highlights of your term.
Well, thank you, Mel. Okay, so I'm sorry. Mel, please tell us a little about who you are and where you are in your career today.
Well, I'm a partner at Leeson Ellis, and you can see I was president 20 years ago, so I'm not a spring chicken. So while I'm a full partner at the firm, I'm reducing my hours every year, sort of like General MacArthur said, old patent attorneys don't die, they just fade away. So I just show up less and less. But I get the chance to do work on things that I'm interested in. I get to do some bar work, especially with the Garner in of court. And so it's an enjoyable time to work on things you like and still meet with people in the community that I enjoy working with.
Oh, that's great. So, Mel, how did you first become aware of the NYIPLA?
Interesting story. I understand you interviewed Andrea Ryan, and her story is probably very similar to mine because we were both associates at the Rumbach Graves Donahue and Raymond firm, which was one of the big boutiques back in the day, along with Fish and Eve and Penny and Edmonds and Kenyon and Kenyon. And it was a requirement. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to join. They just came by and handed me a form to fill out and said, you will become a member and you will go. And I filled out the form. And back in those days, you couldn't just waltz into the association. You had to be recommended by someone outside your firm. So they set up an interview with another member, and I had to go to his office and be interviewed for half an hour, 45 minutes before they put a stamp of approval on and let you into the organization.
That's right. No, I remember that as well. So when did you first become involved with the association?
Well, because the firm insisted that you go, they not only insisted that you show up for meetings, they insisted that you volunteer for a committee and you show up for the committee. And so right away from my first year as an associate, I was attending committee meetings. Originally I thought it was a little presumptuous that they were forcing me to go and become a part of this, but I actually enjoyed it. The meetings were fine. I was meeting other lawyers from other firms that some of them whom I'd come to know in the future. But it gave me a different perspective than simply being in my own office, working with my own people. It was very interesting. And I guess I went along for a while and began to concentrate on trade secrets and was on the trade secret committee for a number of years. And ultimately, I became chair of that committee.
And were there any other activities or roles that you engaged in early on as a member?
I used to go to a lot of the CLE presentations that the association would put on, particularly like the luncheon meetings we used to have. I think they were at the Cornell Club, where you go down and they'd have a guest speaker and you could listen about what was going on in the legal world beyond what you were working on yourself. And so I did that, and they used to have one-day retreats, and I attended those, and those were fun too, especially when golf was involved. I'm an amateur golfer that never got very good, but always liked walking around outdoors.
Well, if you're still golfing, Mel, I'm trying to bring back the golf outing this year. So hopefully you'll be able to join us.
You'll be happy to know I already sent in my thing saying I'll show up. I'm not sure if I can bring anybody, but I'll show up.
Super. So did there come a time when you decided you wanted to assume a leadership role, or did it just evolve over time?
It just evolved over time. there was never a plan. In fact, there wasn't even a plan to be a patent attorney. Every now and then an opportunity would come along and I would jump at it. And there were a number of people from my firm, which was at the time was Darby and Darby, who had been on the had become president, that were on the leadership ladder. And I think they must have recommended me for some higher office along the way. And sure enough, it came true.
So let's talk a little about your time as president. What was your trajectory in the association leading to you becoming the president?
Yeah. Actually, I had a probably unusual one because my first presence on the board was as secretary. And so I would go to board meetings, I would take the minutes, and I would participate, but that's the function I had. And somewhere along the line, they decided that I should be on the ladder. And normally what you do is you go in as the third vice president, I believe. And what happened to me was the person who was supposed to be in that slot withdrew. I'm not sure if they withdrew from the association, but they certainly withdrew from the ladder. And so I started as second vice president. So I skipped right over third vice president.
You went to the head of the class.
Yeah, it was sort of the normal progression through the various phases, which is really an excellent way to prepare somebody for being president of the association, because you see how meetings are run. You get responsibility for setting up things like the judges' dinner and the annual meeting and things like that. So it really gives you some grounding so that when you become president, you know what's going on.
No, that's very true. And also to a certain extent, um, activity on committees as well as leadership roles in the committees. Certainly in some of the committees, like the programs committee. Um, so before we get into any specifics about your presidency, can you give us a general overview of the intellectual property landscape in terms of the issues that were confronting the IP community during your time you were president?
Yeah, I don't have a clear recollection, but generally it was during the time when people were considering a revision to the Patent Act. Ultimately we got it in 2013, but back in 2003, 2004, people were talking about things that needed to be revised. And the New York Association was certainly adding its comments. While I was active with the New York Association, I was also active with the AIPLA, and they were doing the same thing, trying to come up with some draft legislation to try to float to see if we couldn't bring some better harmony, particularly around the world in terms of patent laws, as well as straighten out some of the litigation problems.
Yes, you're right, because I think you're referring to the AIA that was
Yes.
ultimately enacted and became law in 2013. But my recollection is it was almost a 10-year process, right?
Yeah. And if you look at the attempts now to try to fix 101 through legislation, they're about 3 years into it. So if it's anything like the AIA, it'll be a long time
We
before
got a long, we still have a long way to go, unfortunately. So now, can you provide a general overview of the various tasks or responsibilities that you were charged with during your term as president?
My recollection is that there was no specific task. I mean, I did the normal functions of the president, presiding over monthly meetings where issues would arise. Sometimes they were legislative comments, sometimes they were amicus briefs that we were to review. And I know that at the time there was a real concern that we make sure the committee structure was vital and active. And so there was a lot of effort in that direction, but no specific job that I had. Actually, the people who are on the ladder have specific jobs, like you take care of the annual meeting, you take care of the judges' dinner. And so it's a good thing that the president doesn't have to do them, but has already had experience doing them.
Sure. So, did you have any specific goals or a mission that you wanted to accomplish during your time as president, or that arose that you didn't even have going in?
I don't think nothing particularly comes to mind.
Mhm.
I certainly, one of the things is that I wanted to get through it without screwing it up because you know, last thing in the world you want to be known for is the guy that brought down the NYIPLA.
Well, the association has proven invincible. We made it through the pandemic, and here we are on the other end. So,
Yeah.
so from your perspective, what was your greatest accomplishment or proudest moment during the time you were president?
Um, Actually, I can combine that with a story, which is a combination of both my best and proudest moments and my worst moments, because they all happened in the same night.
Wow.
It at the judges' dinner when I was president, I think I was probably one of the first presidents that decided that rather than having an academic speaker or a judge or a politician, that I would get pure entertainment. So I actually had Charles Osgood. He was the Sunday morning, CBS Sunday morning guy.
I remember.
He came on, he told jokes, he told wonderful stories, he played the banjo. And during that time, you could hear a pin drop, which is very unusual for our judges' dinner. As you know,
Sure.
very rowdy affairs. Um, the good thing for me was that I had become president of the association, but at any particular time, maybe you're in a room with 200 or 300 people who are fellow members of the association, and that's about it. But at the judges' dinner, you get a very big platform. You get a couple of thousand people, not only New Yorkers, but people from outside the state and the area. And you get to stand up there as president of the association and make welcoming remarks and a few statements. And so I thought that was one of the proudest moments of my life, and I was very appreciative. I don't know what they do these days, but back in the day, we had it at the Waldorf Astoria. I know we have it at a different hotel, but when we had it at the Waldorf, the president would get the presidential suite at the Waldorf, which was a big living room, multiple bedrooms, just really posh. The kind of life that I haven't lived before or since. And I brought my family with me. My kids had their own bedroom and stuff. They were sitting at the table down front when I was giving my remarks. And so it was really a great time. And excuse me. And after it ended, we all went to the elevator, which was the elevator for the tower. If you remember those dinky little elevators, they're
Yeah.
very small. They were operated by humans. And when the dinner's over, they can get very crowded because a lot of the suites are in the tower. So people crowded in. So my family and I crowded in, and there was no room in the elevator. And the operator moved the switch to go up. And instead of going up, it went down to the floor below. And the doors opened, and there must have been 100 people there. And about 5 or 6 of them decided they were going to squeeze onto an elevator that was already packed to the gills. So they squeezed on. He closed the door. He got the elevator started. It went up about 2 feet and stopped. The elevator just quit on us. So there we sat for, I can't remember how long it was, but it was more than an hour, probably around 2 hours. We were stuck in the elevator 2 feet above the floor. And about an hour in, some of the people began to get a little nervous. There were people, we were banging on the door and hollering, and people outside say, "We know you're in there. We've called for elevator assistance. We'll see what we can do." And somebody had a cell phone and they called 911, and they said, "We're stuck in this elevator. We need assistance to get out." And the elevator and the operator, 911 operator, said, "Well, where are you?" He said, "We're in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel." And they said, "Well, where's that?"
Oh, 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 oh,
So
my God.
we gave him the cross street address for the hotel. And the operator said, "Yeah, I got the cross street address, but where in the street are you?" We say, "It's the whole block. You can't miss it." Well, after about an hour or so of this, I began to feel a little lightheaded. And so what I decided to do is, rather than pass out if I had passed out, I couldn't fall down because the people were so packed. But I decided I was going to sort of slide down the back of the elevator and sit on the floor and sort of regain my composure. And my daughter got upset about that. She thought I was really sick and stuff like that. And some of the people who were on the cell phone thought it was. So probably after an hour and a half, the elevator starts to move again. There's cheering. The doors open at the floor above. And as I struggle out, there is EMS there with a stretcher to take me to the hospital. So they laid me out on the stretcher and talked to me for a while. And after about 15 minutes, they said, "You're okay," and they let me go. But I went from the epitome of my career, speaking before thousands of people, to laying on a stretcher in the lobby.
You know, Mel, I remember the incident. I was at that dinner, but I didn't recall that you were the victim. Oh, wow. Well, that's quite a memory. That's quite a memory. Um,
My wife still reminds me of it too.
yeah. Well, my wife is actually elevator phobic. If that ever happened, I don't know. We probably would have. She might have ended up in a straitjacket. She is truly elevator phobic. She'll climb many flights of stairs to avoid an elevator for that very reason, fearing that it would get stuck. So I never told her about that. Well, subsequent dinners.
Well, where we have it now, there's a nice big modern elevators, and it's only a couple of floors up, so you don't have to worry very much.
That's right. That's right. So, what, if anything, do you see what that might have been your greatest challenge when you were president? Besides getting stuck in an elevator for an hour
Yeah.
and a
I one of the things I found is that the association, and this is going back, 20 years or so, was always very welcoming to me, and it made it very easy for me to move through the various positions in the association to become president. Um, I really didn't run into anything that I would consider a challenge. Obviously, situations would come up, but the board and I would discuss them. We would come up with a solution, and they were carried out. And we were reasonably successful. It was a reasonably calm period. It's like those who harken back to politics in our country when things used to be very calm, and you
half.
know you didn't hear about the White House except maybe once a month they said the White House was doing something, but the rest of the time you went about your life. And I
Yeah.
think maybe my presidency was kind of like that, where there was not much dramatic, although there were really efforts to make sure the profession was proceeding, that we kept the pipeline going for new people coming into the association. And so generally a good time.
Yeah, the good old days when when compromise was not a dirty word. Um, so, Mel, what advice can you give our younger or newer members of NYIPLA if they aspire to assume a leadership role or perhaps even one day become president of NYIPLA?
What I found was the only thing I did do, and actually this was going back to the story about how I got in the association at the Brumbaugh firm. Um, they not only signed you up, but they sort of discussed what membership meant with you. It was in a one-on-one relationship. Like at the judges' dinner, they would get people together and say, "Okay, we're going to this dinner. This is what's going to happen. You're assigned to this client. You make sure this happens." So there was a lot of talk about it. And one of the things they said was, you treat your responsibilities to the association the same way you treat your responsibilities to a client of the firm.
Mm.
And if you approach it that way, what you do is you not only show up for a meeting, or if you're on a Zoom call, just sit in the background with your camera off and your microphone silent, but you participate. You say what your ideas, what you think. And when they say, "Can somebody do something?" you don't have to take the first one, but pretty soon you're going to have to raise your hand and do something. And when you do it like you're doing work for a client. And what happens is that over the course of years, other people will see you do it, and you will get a reputation as somebody that people can rely upon to get things done. And that's the kind of people that they want to bring onto the board and to put in other areas of leadership. So I would say, putting in the effort is what gets it done. Um, I was very fortunate, and I got the ultimate reward for it. A lot of people don't get it, but it's still a reward to just participate, to get things done, to see your efforts turn into successful programs and things like that. So I think that's the best thing for them to do.
You know, Mel, that was a great way to, that's great advice and a great way to put it. You're absolutely right. And in some respects, you would think it should come naturally, but it is good advice anyway for those that it doesn't come naturally. In general, to take on any responsibility the same way as you put it, that you would to serve your client.
Yeah. You know, often if you're at your firm, regardless of what you're doing, it could be, or your corporation, it could be litigation, it could be prosecution, but you have sort of that work that's right in front of you. And to give up some of your personal time to go out in an evening, um, is you say, well, what's in it for me? Well, what I tell you can be in it for you is that you can make good friends with people. You can get to know what the profession is like beyond your own environment. Just a short sideline. Back in 2013, I was representing a client, and the attorneys on the other side were from another firm. In fact, they were from the Brumbaugh firm. Eventually went into Baker Botts.
Right.
So they were Baker Botts attorneys. And when we first got together for the first meeting of council, they said that our IP head knows you, and he says to be civil with you. Not that I'm sure Baker Botts attorneys are civil all the time, but that's the kind of reward that you get. Somebody knows you, and it's very hard to be outrageous with somebody that you know, or somebody who knows the people in your organization. So you get that kind of a benefit as well.
Sure. Do you recall the attorney that you were working with at the time over at the Baker Botts?
Yeah. Oh boy, I should remember. Bob Hire.
Rob Mayer.
I'm sorry.
Rob Mayer.
Bob Mayer.
He's a great guy,
Rich,
great attorney.
something other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I came to know a couple of the folks over there with my first appointment as a special master. They were before me, and they were just great.
Yeah. It was, the litigation went on until 2019. But and throughout, we had cordial relationships.
Yeah.
I saw one of them a few years later, and I said, "What's wrong? You don't call anymore? You don't write?"
Well, that's a lesson that, I always try to pass on to young attorneys. Being a zealous advocate doesn't mean that you have to be a fool.
Right.
And it doesn't serve any valuable purpose either for the clients or that for that matter for your own reputation.
Yeah, I think that if anything, what it does is get the other side hostile as well.
Right.
And if you come in and you're reasonable, they'll be reasonable with you. And everybody, no matter how good you are, you're going to get to a point where you need a favor.
True.
Something happened and you can't get this thing done. Can you give me another week or something like that? And it goes down a lot easier if you've been as accommodating as you want them to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, okay, so I think you probably already described it, but is there anything else you might be able to provide as advice to younger members as to get the most benefit from their membership in the NYIPLA?
Yeah, I would just repeat what I said, but one of them is certainly trying to do excellent work. If you're assigned to a committee and you're studying cases and you need to do a write-up on a particular case, do it as though you were going to do it for the senior partner in your firm. Because people who are senior partners in your firm are going to look at what you did. A lot of that work material gets filtered up to the board and to other places in the association, and they can see who's doing excellent work. And it's very good if you spend time doing excellent work and building up a reputation. If you make one mistake, people will forgive it. If you do crappy work all the time, you make a mistake, they'll say, well, there he goes again. And so that's what I say is good advice for anybody in any profession.
No, you're absolutely right. And at least at this point in time, don't use Chat GPT.
Yeah. Actually, I do use Chat GPT for background. So if I want to get the background on something, I don't cite cases or anything like that, but technology background, the same way I used to look it up on Wikipedia.
Uh-huh.
I now ask Chat GPT, give me a couple of paragraphs about this technological area, and it'll spit out something. I said, okay, that's good, that's reasonable, and I can go along with that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, I've kind of shied away from it. I have my own thoughts about AI and generative AI in general. So, Mel, we're about to wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts during our wrap up here with the interview?
Yes, sort of my final comment would be that I thoroughly enjoyed all my time at the AIPLA, I mean, at the NYIPLA, and that even though I was sort of hijacked into being in, once I was there, it was really a wonderful experience. And I certainly recommend it to any new members or existing members.
Well, that's great. And I will tell you from my own personal experience, Mel, I've enjoyed every opportunity to work together with you on what, various activities along the way here during my time with NYIPLA. So I appreciate it. And I certainly appreciate your taking the time out to participate in this process.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Mel.
You're welcome.
Have a great weekend.
Too. Bye.
Bye-bye.